When it comes to their pets, the monarchy has always done things differently from the rest of us. Kings and queens raised in the rarefied atmosphere of royal palaces have often tolerated eccentric behaviour in their animals.
Harvey has soiled some of the finest carpets in the land.
In life, some royal pets are pampered to death, while in death some are immortalised in stone and others interred in royal burial plots. When they outlive their masters, some are even allowed pride of place in the funeral procession.
The collar was made of silver and it simply said, "I belong to the king."
Over the centuries, royalty has exerted a considerable influence on our taste in pets. The royals have made obscure breeds fashionable, imported lapdogs from far-flung royal empires, and even created new breeds of their own. Perhaps it's no exaggeration to say that pets as we know them today wouldn't have existed without royal influence. Pets have played a greater role in the lives of their royal owners than we might expect. During her life, Queen Victoria owned a total of 88 different pets, and her residence at Osborne House in the Isle of Wight is a monument to their obedience to their mistress. In the age of the tabloid kiss and tell, obedience is something that the monarchy can no longer always take for granted. So, to modern royals, a pet represents that rarest of things, a loyal subject.
A dog is totally discreet, or almost 100% discreet. They do, of course, wag their tails in acknowledgement and recognition of people, but on the whole, you can rely on a dog not to gossip, not to repeat anything, not to talk to the newspapers, and they're there all the time.
But sometimes royal dogs do go walkabout. For Prince Charles, the loss of a trusted friend took on all the significance of a constitutional crisis.
Charles lost his Jack Russell Tigger when he was staying at Sandringham in Norfolk. The dog just went off hunting, as Jack Russells do, and apparently they think he went down an enormous hole, and the whole place was searched for 24 hours to try and find this dog. I mean, Charles was absolutely inconsolable, as anyone that loves dogs would be.
For Princess Anne, it was a case of a loyal pet making unwelcome headlines. After her bull terrier attacked 2 children in Windsor Great Park, Her Royal Highness was fined the princely sum of £500 and became the first member of the British royal family to become a convicted felon. Also no strangers to the glare of the media spotlight are Princess Michael of Kent and her husband, the Queen's cousin. Away from the massed ranks of the paparazzi, they are surrounded by a coterie of pets. Their country retreat in Gloucestershire is home to a menagerie of cats and other animals, and by her own admission, the princess owes her very royal status to a dog.
My husband always had an Alsatian. I hear that the dog was quite fiercely protective of its territory where he lived, and perhaps ladies weren't quite brave enough to pass the sentry at the door. I have this theory that he was unmarried for so long because this dog was so enchanting that he was perfectly content with the company of his dog. And then when the dog died, he got me.
Today, it's a slightly smaller dog that's the most recognisable icon of British royalty. Behind these walls, a dynasty has ruled supreme for over 70 years, the Royal House of Corgi. Corgis were originally bred for herding cattle because their stature enabled them to nip at the hooves of recalcitrant cows. Now they're more likely to be seen and heard in the corridors of the royal residences.
The Queen's corgis have perfected a perfect early warning system so that her staff know when she's about to come into a room. Their claws make a real symphony of sound, and that is what they call the alarm system. You hear the claws and then you know that Her Majesty will be very shortly behind them.
The first corgi to become a member of the royal household, Dookie, was given to the young Princess Elizabeth in 1933. Since then, the love affair between Her Majesty and her corgis has endured for as long as her royal marriage. The Queen's corgis always accompany their owner as she travels between her official residences and estates at Sandringham and Balmoral. When royal duties take her abroad and separate her from her most trusted canine companions, the Queen insists that her dogs are there to meet her off the plane.
She loves them so much that when she comes back, the dogs are brought to the airport to greet her, and they cause quite a lot of havoc in the car as well, chewing things.
For the royal dynasties of Europe, bloodlines and breeding were an obsession. Historically, royal marriages were arranged to ensure that the monarchy remained a breed apart. So, it's no surprise that when it comes to royal pets, pedigree is paramount. Good breeding has always been an essential part of royal history. Traditionally, political links between royal houses were forged by intermarriage. Over time, the desire to preserve the integrity of the royal line has been applied to pets as well. The Queen's personal interest in the fine art of dog breeding has even resulted in a new breed entirely, the Dorgie, a cross between a corgi and a dachshund. To ensure that only the most well-heeled dogs enjoyed royal privileges, the royal kennels at Sandringham were established in 1879. The kennels have been producing the renowned Sandringham strain of black Labradors since 1911, including the Queen's father's three favourites, Minzy, Scrummy and Stiffy.
Jade, go back.
Inheriting the breeding bug from her Labrador-loving father, the Queen oversees the breeding programme personally. All new puppies are registered at the Kennel Club with the prefix Sandringham and named by Her Majesty herself.
Jade, until she's actually sort of done something terrible, she's not... Jade, when you took the puppies' dinner the other night, what did I do? Oh, Jade.
What,
Jade.
she ate the puppies' dinner?
Yes, she ate the puppies' dinner.
She'd do that.
And then there was a grinning face all over the hall, you know. Jade.
To secure the continuation of the royal line, the Queen has presented Prince William with one of her most prized assets.
Widgeon is William's Labrador, and Widgeon, he's called that because it's a type of bird. And he is a shooting dog, and he has sired, certainly, one family of puppies.
The Queen's generosity has also extended to heads of state and foreign dignitaries. Where once a monarch would have given the hand in marriage of her son or daughter, now she proffers the paw of a Labrador.
She has given these to certainly Giscard d'Estaing, and I believe even Mitterrand's dog may have come from the royal kennels at Sandringham. Obviously, because they come from the Queen, the royal Labradors have the highest reputation in the world for that particular breed.
The royal interest in dog breeding also has a more competitive edge. Basset hounds were the first royal dogs to be exhibited at Crufts by Queen Alexandra. And by 1894, when the Prince and Princess of Wales showed Bassets descended from dogs given to them by the Comtesse de Paris, foreign breeds reigned supreme.
By the 19th century, everybody was very concerned about breeding national dogs. So the Basset hound is a French dog, and she gave these two, Babil and Bijou, to the Prince of Wales, later Edward VII, and he then bred himself from these two dogs.
Through their preoccupation with pedigree, the royals have become the arbiters of canine good taste. During the days of the British Empire, large sums of money regularly changed hands for good pedigree dogs, and in India, the ruling classes considered owning a Crufts champion to be the height of exoticism. In the 1920s, the Maharaja of Junagadh spent £22,000 on the wedding of his favourite golden retriever, Roshan Nara, to a best-in-breed winner called Bobby.
But as soon as the marriage was consummated, which I think was fairly immediate, then Bobby was dispatched, because the Maharaja had absolutely no interest in Bobby. But Rosanara spent the rest of her days on a silver palanquin with these wonderful puppies, and looked after and adored by the Maharaja, and living in incredible style.
But good breeding doesn't always ensure good behaviour. Princess Michael of Kent's black Labradors may have blue blood, but they still possess the basest of animal instincts and have to be restrained from consorting with commoners.
Because the Labradors tend to stray, because people walk past going for walks with their own dogs, so they like to join in, and I'm always a little bit worried about that. So we've inserted something called an invisible fence, which is a very, very clever idea, because you bury a wire around your garden or around the area that you want to keep the dogs in, and you put a special collar on them. Actually, it's got a little device inside that when they come near this buried wire, it rattles. And if they try to cross the buried wire, they actually get an electric shock, like you put an electric fence for cattle. And when they've done that once, believe me, they don't do it again.
Despite the elaborate precautions taken to stop one of the dogs, Garbo, from straying, it didn't prevent her from getting a taste of forbidden fruit.
My housekeeper in the kitchen said, Garbo's rolled on her back and she looks quite large. And Labradors, they eat a lot, they get fat and so. And she was very young, and she took her down to the vet and scanned her, and of course she had puppies a few weeks later. But how? And they were little black Labrador puppies. So I thought, well, this is extraordinary. I mean, she had the good taste to find a black Labrador. But my husband, being president of the Kennel Club, he can't actually have illegitimate children, And so we thought the best thing to do is to bring them up and at 3 months, give them to all the neighbours. And they grew, and they grew, and they grew. And they're all this big. And the father was clearly a Newfoundland. They are huge dogs and perfectly charming. We meet them all the time because and the mother sort of could pass underneath their tummies almost,
One of the results of the royal scandal was Big Boris. Although he seems unconcerned that he's not purebred royal pedigree, his mum would clearly like him to behave with a bit more decorum. Having resolved their differences, Mum and her much bigger son posed together as if for a royal photo opportunity. Inevitably, the royals' taste in pets has been passed on to their subjects. Dogs that once were only fit for a king are now commonly owned by the British general public. Not only has the monarchy made pet owning fashionable, but it's been responsible for introducing many of the most popular breeds into the country. Lapdogs first originated in France as a fashion accessory, designed to be tucked under the arms of noble ladies. Mary Queen of Scots' time at the French court meant that when she returned to Britain in 1560, she brought her miniature Maltese with her. The dogs accompanied her during her subsequent long imprisonment, and one even managed to hide under her skirts at her execution. The miniature spaniel was also originally an import from the French court at Versailles. King Charles I posed the dogs with his 3 eldest children for a famous royal portrait by Van Dyck. When their father was executed at Whitehall in 1649, it's alleged that he took his dog with him to the block.
It is said that when he went to his death at the banqueting house, that his dog Rogue followed him and was at his side. In some ways, it's symbolic of loyalty. When everybody else has abandoned you, who is there but your faithful dog? This is, of course, the image of fidelity and loyalty, which is so associated with dogs and royal families. Who else can they trust?
Charles passed his love of toy spaniels on to his son, and the breed reached the height of their popularity in the reign of Charles II. Their close association with the king also gave them a new name, Cavaliers. It's not only the French court that has influenced the choice of royal pets, they've come from further afield as well. The Japanese toy spaniel, or Chin, arrived as a gift to Queen Alexandra from the Queen of Japan in 1902. And in the mid-19th century, the ranks of royal lapdogs were joined by one of the most easily identifiable of breeds, the Pekingese. Originating in China, ownership of the Pekingese was restricted to the imperial family and their closest courtiers. When, in 1860, an Anglo-French army invaded China, a Pekingese named Luti became one of the unlikely spoils of war.
The British soldiers were called in to the palace. They raided the palace, but the emperor and empress by then had gone with their possessions and also some of the dogs, leaving 5 behind. And the general took one and then presented it to Queen Victoria.
Lucy had the most dramatic history of all of Queen Victoria's pets. The Queen adored him and made Pekingese extremely fashionable. The whole of London definitely wanted to be in on the new rage.
Come on in, come on. Come on, babes, come on in, come on. There you are, shut the door.
Another of Queen Victoria's favoured breed of lapdogs has its origins in an arranged royal marriage. In 1761, Queen Charlotte of Pomerania arrived in England for her wedding to King George III. As well as her royal title, she brought with her a pet Pomeranian. Queen Victoria purchased her first pedigree pom in 1888 and surrounded herself with them throughout her reign. After the death of her husband, Prince Albert, the Queen retreated to her estate at Balmoral, where in later life she was comforted by her children and her favourite Pomeranian, Turi.
She quite liked a dog that she could ride along in her carriage with the dog sitting on her lap. And obviously with Turi you've got the famous film footage which was done by W.D. Downey in 1896, where the Queen is actually on moving film with her dog, which is so incredible. And the Tsar and Empress of Russia are following her.
Victoria paid close attention to her dog's breeding, and through careful manipulation of the breeding stock, she succeeded in her aim of making the Pomeranian a truly toy dog.
They were around about 12 to 14 pounds in weight, but over the years she managed to bring them down in size to about 7. But of course today's dogs would be between 4 and 5 pounds. Although they're very small little dogs, they have great big hearts. They think they're Rottweilers in some cases. They would defend their owners to the point of, I think, to death really. As a pack they will tackle any other dog that comes along.
By January 1901, Queen Victoria lay dying in her bed at Osborne House. Only the chosen few were allowed into the royal death chamber.
Her companion was Turi, and she did ask, when she was on her deathbed, that this little dog came, and I believe he did, as it was said that little dog sat on her bed while she was dying. So he comforted her even at her end.
Lapdogs were also a permanent fixture in the lives of Queen Victoria's Russian relations. Her granddaughter, Alexandra, Tsarina of Russia, inherited Victoria's love of small animals and surrounded herself with them. Toy dogs were allowed the run of the royal yacht, and the Siberian Samoyed had pride of place at the royal table. But it was during the turbulent days of the Russian Revolution that lapdogs were to become enshrined in royal history. After the Tsar's abdication, the Russian royal family were imprisoned at Ekaterinburg in the Urals. Their only consolation was that they were allowed to take their dogs with them, and when it came to their brutal deaths, there was only one survivor, a cocker spaniel called Joy.
Joy was a rather independent character who wandered off and therefore as a result was saved when they were exterminated. But for reasons nobody's ever completely understood, when it was found by the advancing white Russians, the dog had gone completely blind, which people say was shock at the hideous events that happened at Ekaterinburg.
Another of the family's pets wasn't quite so fortunate. A toy spaniel called Jimmy was given to the Tsar's daughter Anastasia in 1917. Jimmy's only lasting legacy was that he helped solve the riddle of the disappearance of the Russian royal family.
As for Jimmy, Jimmy was actually buried with the royal family and did help to establish what had happened to them, or at least added to the enigma of what had happened to them after their deaths, because they originally were thrown down a mine shaft, but one of the executioners blabbed, and so they then moved the bodies and threw them somewhere else and threw acid on the bodies. So they were obviously mystified when they found the body of Jimmy, but no remains of the royal family. And from that they deduced that they must have been moved, they must have been killed at the same time. So inadvertently Jimmy helped to locate the corpses.
In death, royal lapdogs have traditionally been treated as a breed apart. Following the death of her husband, King Edward VII, Queen Alexandra lived at Marlborough House. Hidden away in the corner of her back garden is a very royal pet cemetery. Here lie the remains of all Alexandra's beloved pets, including her Japanese toy spaniel, Togo, who she described as the joy and pleasure of my life. When little Togo died in 1902, the Queen was inconsolable. Against all advice to the contrary, the Queen insisted on keeping his body in her bedroom for several days, where it began to give off an increasingly sulphurous smell. It took the arrival of some egg sandwiches to bring her to her senses. The Queen smelt them and, with tears in her eyes, declared, "Just like my little Togo."
She said, "I like people, but I love animals." She was married to a serial adulterer, so I should think that also contributed. She was also, of course, stone deaf. Now, those two things, I should think, contributed towards this. Nobody could, she couldn't hear a word that anybody said to her, so her animals wouldn't have worried about that. She spoilt them absolutely rotten, to the extent that she had to be advised by the British government that she must rein in her extravagance between the wars, which she refused to do. She carried on merrily to the end, spoiling them as much as she could. Her great passion for animals was conveyed to all her children, and indeed, I say, genetically carries through to this day.
Small dogs also provided consolation to a 20th century outcast from the British royal family, King Edward VIII. 2 years before his abdication, he gave a cairn to his then mistress, Mrs. Simpson. When the terrier died from a snake bite on the eve of her wedding, Mrs. Simpson took the opportunity to make a further break with royal tradition.
The traditional pet of the royal family at that point was the cairn. After the war, we turned to more British pets. The cairn was obviously a Scottish breed. And the Duke of Windsor, as Prince of Wales, had been a very keen cairn lover. But the Duchess of Windsor refuses to have cairns after the debacle of the abdication and switches to the pug. And it's a bit of a sort of cocking a snoop at the Queen Mother, then Queen, who is said to have detested pugs to her dying day as a result.
Estranged from the rest of the royal family, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor sought solace in a new dynasty of pugs. The couple settled in Paris, where, in 1956, the Duchess's dog, Davy Crockett, won first prize in a Paris dog show.
They lived in the Bois de Boulogne, and I think her house was full of the most lovely pug memorabilia. And she had things like silver bowls for them, which I think had all their names engraved on them. And she had the most beautiful chaise longue in her sitting room, which had a row of pugs which were made out of material. I think the Duchess of Windsor used to say they were her surrogate children when she had her whole family of pugs. They were treated like children, and I think pugs are very, very much like that. They're treated like children.
For the royals, treating their pets like children has often meant that the pets have behaved like spoilt brats, and sometimes the level of royal indulgence has had messy consequences. The close relationship between certain royals and their pets has often led to friction within the royal household. Prince Charles's pet Labrador Harvey was unpopular with Princess Diana because of his inability to control his bowels.
Harvey has soiled some of the finest carpets in the land. But when he married Diana, she said, "I really can't have that great big dog in the house making messes everywhere." So he was banished to a kennel outside.
But the most notorious pet for royal misbehaviour was Edward VII's inseparable companion, Caesar. Now safely interred in the pet cemetery at Marlborough House, during his lifetime, Caesar was a law unto himself.
The collar simply said, "I belong to the king." This was a very important dog. It was a Norfolk Terrier. It was a friend that he could completely trust. He could say anything to this friend with a certain knowledge that that confidence could never be betrayed.
Caesar's personal habits meant that few shared the king's affection for his surrogate court jester.
It's said that Caesar was a legendary incontinent, which meant that when ambassadors and people of importance were given audience by the king at Sandringham, Caesar was around and about, and instead of availing himself of a lamppost, he availed himself of the leg of one of the visiting dignitaries.
Edward VII's mistress, Alice Keppel, didn't really like Caesar, but had to pretend she did. And the reason she didn't like him was because he was so smelly. It wasn't that he wasn't looked after, but he just was an old, smelly terrier.
Even at his master's funeral, Caesar put the wind up other royals.
There's no doubt at all that Caesar took precedence over 9 kings who attended the funeral of King Edward VII, but really there was no doubt as to who was going to outrank them all, and that was the king's dog.
Perhaps the most bizarre relationship was between Edward's son, King George V, and his pet parrot, Charlotte. Every morning, Charlotte would perch on the end of his finger and join the king for breakfast. Unfortunately, her table manners left a lot to be desired. Charlotte was renowned for squawking obscenities at visiting dignitaries and lacking the toilet training that her elevated position required.
My grandfather, Louis Gregg, was having breakfast with the king at Sandringham when the parrot obviously jumped on the table, and my grandfather tried to ignore it. And the parrot certainly wasn't going to allow that, and got attention in probably the most inappropriate way. And my grandfather luckily had a napkin, which he was able to try to cover up for dear Charlotte. Everyone in the household knew that no one could get away with what Charlotte got away with. She was the most badly behaved member of the household. She could do what she wanted, when she wanted, and she did. And so I think it was a nice companion for him. He could have just Charlotte, who wouldn't contradict him, who wouldn't say anything he didn't want to particularly hear, and if he did, he could just say, "Shut up."
Hunting has always been one of the favourite leisure pursuits of the royal houses. Some have even suggested that there have been royals who preferred hunting to hard work.
There's no doubt at all that hunting is the pursuit of nobility and of royalty. It has very ancient sources indeed. The New Forest was created specifically for William the Conqueror in 1079 as a hunting forest, just for that, for the king's pleasure.
When it comes to the ancestry of royal pets, many of them first gained the royal seal of approval as traditional hunting dogs. As well as being used symbolically in family portraits to denote the strength of the clan, in Elizabethan times, mastiffs were reared for combat and trained to kill bears, bulls and other beasts.
British hunting dogs had extremely high reputation right through from the 15th century until probably the 18th century. British mastiffs fought at Agincourt. They were fighting dogs as well as hunting dogs, huge, fierce creatures, renowned for their ferocity. Even under the Roman Empire, they'd been imported to Rome from England. They were so celebrated because there was no dog as fierce as a British mastiff. The British were likened to mastiffs for their ferocity.
The royal ancestry of the greyhound, meanwhile, can be traced back to the rulers of ancient Egypt.
Tutankhamun owned greyhounds, Queen Cleopatra, and they were paramount in the family life. Only the royal household and nobility were allowed to keep greyhounds because they were afraid that the ordinary people having greyhounds would poach and hunt the game on the reserves.
As a hunting dog, the greyhound became a popular gift between European royal families keen on currying political favour. In the Middle Ages, the greyhound was bred exclusively for the nobility, and in 1014 King Canute went so far as to introduce a set of forest laws banning commoners from owning them. It was Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, who helped to change the public perception of the greyhound. His favourite dog, Eos, was fed at the dining table from a silver fork.
The greyhound is sometimes perceived as a royal beast, and they were the favourite of royalty. They actually, when they're not hunting, they're very docile, friendly, rather wonderful creatures. And so there was a dual function there, a hunting-killing machine that was actually a sentimental, beautiful pet as well. What better accompaniment for a king? I can't imagine.
A distant relative of the greyhound, the Russian borzoi, also found favour in royal circles after the dog-loving Queen Alexandra received one as a wedding present from the Tsar. Bred to hunt wolves in its native Russia, the breed is now better known as a show dog.
It's always been a very aristocratic breed, but it becomes a really imperial breed in the 1860s, immediately after the abolition of serfdom, because with the abolition of serfdom, a lot of the aristocratic families could no longer afford to keep up their kennels of Borzoi, so there was a risk of the breed becoming extinct. And then the imperial families step in to preserve them. And at that moment, gifts are given to the British royal family by the Tsar. Also are bought, in fact, by Americans, and in fact, many of the Borzois today, of the real imperial stock, are to be found more in America and Great Britain than in Russia itself.
Another animal that made the transition from royal hunting dog to royal pet was the dachshund. Originally bred in Germany to hunt badgers, the dachshund arrived in Britain courtesy of Queen Victoria's ancestors.
She first has dachshunds in the 1840s. They come from her German family. She was particularly fond of them, but they also had a very practical role in that they're great rat catchers. So they kept the palace clean, and they were fairly mandatory in all royal households in the 19th century because they were beginning to understand the importance of hygiene.
Queen Victoria's attachment to another four-legged friend, the collie, meant that although in her lifetime she owned 5 of them, she was inspired to call them all by the same name, Noble. In 1872, the Queen's particular favourite, Noble IV, even had a statue dedicated to him.
Noble IV, who's modelled at Osborne, where you see the models, and by Joseph Boehm, the great Hungarian sculptor. She's been stroked so often that it's sort of beginning to wear away because it's considered so realistic. But she had enormous affection. The poor dog went ill, and the vet advised that perhaps if he were encouraged to eat a little less, he'd probably live to a ripe old age, which indeed he did. And I think she was so grateful that he survived this upset. That's another reason she loved him. Also, he was incredibly well-trained or well-behaved, whatever mattered most in Victorian days. I mean, she could feed him cake and he wouldn't even chew it until he received a formal order from the Queen. He would just keep the cake in his mouth until he was told he was actually allowed to chew it.
The royal interest in hunting and hunting dogs continued unabated into the Edwardian era. During the reign of King Edward VII, royal shooting parties became de rigueur, and game birds began to be raised on the estates of Sandringham on an unprecedented scale.
There's no doubt at all that hunting animals was the centre of social activity during the season in Edwardian society. And if you were invited to a hunt, it didn't mean that it was simply a hunt. There was a hunt ball, there was marvellous entertainment, picnics, drinks, pieces of porcelain made specifically for this, picnic sets, clothing specifically for it, even tiny stick pins decorated with hunting horns and grouse's feet and I don't know what else. So it was an enormously important social event.
Historically, the monarchy's enthusiasm for hunting paid little heed to the concept of animal suffering, and the royals of the past were particularly bloodthirsty. In Elizabethan times, they were willing spectators at even the cruelest of blood sports.
There's absolutely no doubt at all that Queen Elizabeth I would have witnessed an enormous amount of cruelty during her lifetime. The idea of animal cruelty is a relatively modern one. In the major religions, we're taught that animals have no souls. So the idea that you can be cruel to something that has no soul is really an anathema. And so it gave people license, really, to indulge in bear baiting and bull baiting and all kinds of utterly depraved pursuits that we very rightly frown upon today.
Queen Victoria was definitely not amused by the bloodletting of the past. In 1840, she lent the royal title to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals to create the RSPCA.
Strange, though it seems to us, Britain had a reputation for being very cruel to animals until Queen Victoria's reign. So the royal family played a very, very important part in the movement against cruelty to animals.
In their desire to treat their animals like humans, some members of the monarchy have flaunted the laws of the land. Quarantine regulations introduced in 1901 to combat the threat of rabies were ignored by Edward and Wallis Simpson, and the law was treated with equal disdain by King Edward VII.
At one point, the French president, Clemenceau, did point out to him that he was actually infringing the quarantine laws, and Edward VII said, well, I make the laws, why shouldn't I break them?
Queen Alexandra also frequently sailed aboard the royal yacht with an unusual assortment of animals.
She was sitting reading on deck when suddenly a black ram appeared beside her and put his head in her lap. And she said, what on earth is this on the yacht, a ram? Oh, well, that's dinner tomorrow night, ma'am, she was told. And so she felt so sorry for this ram. She immediately reprieved it, and they had a vegetarian dinner instead. And the ram joined her menagerie.
Today, it's not only black rams that find themselves enjoying the privileged life of a royal consort. Historically, cats have been regarded as soulful, mysterious creatures. But though the ancient Egyptians worshipped them as gods, British royalty were a little slower to accept them. While considered useful for keeping a check on the rodent population of royal palaces, cats weren't kept as royal pets until the 19th century.
The attitude towards cats in the past is a slightly ambivalent one. I think sometimes they were seen as messengers from hell, really. There's a slightly sort of sinister aspect to them. The cat is the most deliciously marvellous creature for its beauty and its pelt, but it's a remote creature too. It also comes from the farmyard, and it's a destructive animal. It goes for prey, and it's very bad news if you keep birds. It's very bad news in reverse if you keep dogs. So perhaps this is the reason we see very few cats as royal pets.
The first British monarch to keep cats as pets was Queen Victoria, who had a penchant for Persians. In this Victorian painting from the Queen's collection, a small Persian kitten is seen cowering from the attention of a pug, a fox terrier and a dachshund.
She had innumerable dogs, so to introduce a cat into this world would have ended up in a fracas, to say the very least. And even then there's a slightly menacing, rather cruel streak in this picture, because the little kitten is sitting on a stool in the farmyard, surrounded by Queen Victoria's dogs. One move and I'm afraid the cat's over.
Of the modern-day royals, the biggest cat fancier is Princess Michael of Kent, and her particular passion is for the Siamese, a cat which first appeared in Britain in 1884 as a gift from the King of Siam.
Because they're much more intelligent, I find. They're characters, more like dogs. They have conversations with you, and they're just extremely clever. They know everything. They know how you're feeling. They know. They always wait by the front door the day that I'm coming back from a trip. They're all sitting there, waiting. I just find them great characters. They sleep with me on the bed, and at this time of year, under the eiderdown, and they tend to sort of have their own little sleeping habits. Percy likes to be behind my knees. Green is at the end of the bed, but in the morning he comes up onto the pillow, and I wake up to purring. That's my wake-up call. And if I'm not waking or pretending not to, he just taps my face with his little gloved paws. Gloved paws. We can't have any claws with gloved paws. And I don't know, I like them. They're good company.
Wary of losing her prize pets to the dangers lurking in the wild, the princess has turned to a royal trick of the trade recommended by her distant relative, Queen Victoria. An antique cat collar may not be quite as restrictive as an electric fence, but it serves a similar purpose.
I put a silver collar, like this one, around my cats so that when they're in the park, anywhere, the keeper sees the flash of the light on the collar and immediately knows it's one of my cats. So I found this in an antique shop, actually, and I don't really force my poor cat to wear it. I have these leather ones. I'm going to put him down, actually.
There may not be any big cats lurking in the jungle of Princess Michael's back garden, but it is home to several Burmese, a cat first introduced to the shores of Britain in the 1800s as a chocolate Siamese. The breed later died out. In keeping with royal tradition, the princess has reserved a little corner of Gloucestershire as a memorial to her dearly departed feline friends.
Holly, Burmese Holly, sweetest little brown cat we all love. She used to sleep on my daughter's pillow. He was my daughter's very great favourite. I said, darling, you can't have a cat sleeping on your pillow. You're meant to sleep on the pillow. She used to sleep beside the pillow and Holly on the pillow. And I kept saying it's unhygienic and Nanny went mad, but I'm afraid that's the way it was. And then over here we've got the first Siamese in our life, and the children thought he was totally magical. Whenever you spoke to him, he'd speak back. You say Maggie, and he'd say meow. Are you happy? Meow. Are you sad? Meow. And always replied to your question.
If today's royal pets seem pampered, it's nothing compared to the pets of the past. In the 19th century, pets enjoyed greater royal privileges than most members of the court. In the French courts of the 18th and 19th century, royal pets were afforded every privilege. At King Louis XIV's palace of Versailles, puppies were born and nursed between the bed covers, even at the expense of household hygiene.
Till the mid-19th century, until really people begin to develop any idea of hygiene, dogs almost always slept on the bed, where many courtiers complain about the disgusting smell. Charles II in England was a particularly filthy court, and we know they slept on the bed, whereas his queen, Catherine Braganza, had her own room specifically for the dogs.
For French poodles and other pampered pets, the bed was something that changed with the times. Different shapes and sizes reflected the architectural and social developments of the day. One constant in the history of dog furniture has been the plush velvet cushion. Landseer's first royal commission was to paint Queen Victoria's dog Dash sitting on one, and in the royal houses of Europe, pets have reclined regally on them for centuries.
Cushion seems to have originated in the Renaissance courts of Italy, and it becomes, in a way, the standard dog bed. Of course, it's not, you can't call it a kennel, it is a bed. It's very mobile, you can move it from room to room, it's warm. It's very grand, it's embroidered, it's crimson, with tassels, with cloth of gold. It could be very lavish or it can be very simple, and they're easily replaceable.
When bathing in the sea became a fashionable cure for a variety of ills, including being bitten by a rabid dog, pets accompanied their owners on therapeutic trips to the seaside. And to ensure that their canine charges didn't suffer any discomfort, they were provided with their own designer accommodation.
That almost certainly dates from the early 19th century, when sea bathing became the fashion. They would take their animals with them. Little beach hut, miniature beach hut, stroke kennel, would be there on the beach to prevent the dog getting sunstroke, of course, and where it could retire to once, presumably, he too had had a little bathe. They would often be dressed in little sailor costumes, with collars saying Cabourg or Trouville or Deauville, after one of the fashionable beaches then being created in France.
Queen Alexandra's devotion to animals was also reflected in the fashions of the time. Her trademark dog collar rows of tightly fitting pearls became all the rage in high society. And in 1903, when the Russian jeweller Fabergé opened his first shop in London, he sought royal patronage by making models of the Queen's favourite animals to be given to her as gifts.
I think the important thing to say about Fabergé was that it was a very expensive shop to buy small, wonderful things to give to your friends. And what better thing to give to somebody was a portrait of their favourite animal. The process of their making was quite lengthy. They had to be modelled in wax. So Fabergé sent his sculptors to Sandringham, and they worked in Queen Alexandra's farmyard there, making three-dimensional portraits of her favourite pets in wax, which was a very free medium, and that's why the end result is very, very animated and vivacious.
One of the Queen's most spirited pets, a white cockatoo called Cocky, had to be banished from her bedroom because of his shrieking fits. But he too was immortalised in semi-precious stone, a suitable epitaph for a pampered royal pet. Back at her home in Gloucestershire, Princess Michael is discovering that the class war is still raging, thanks to the rivalry between streetwise alley cats and more refined royal felines.
This is Percy, who is a wimp and a runt, and a very special young man. He has got a wound on his back at the moment, but it's healed very nicely because he took on a very large rescue cat from Battersea, which I have had here until this accident 2 weeks ago. And this very beautiful Battersea cat we loved. It was black and white spots, and Battersea called it Prince Charming.
Prince Charming, now renamed Dick to reflect his lack of good breeding, is one of the many cats Princess Michael has adopted from the rescue shelter of Battersea Cats Home. Dick was intended to catch mice on the royal estate, but he had ideas above his station and was much more interested in getting his paws on a place in the royal household instead.
Dick decided he was going to be a house cat, and he came over all the time and terrorised mine. I found he and this little man growling at each other 2 weekends ago. I rushed downstairs, whereupon they set upon one another, and Dick's 3 times the size of this one, and so I picked Dick up by the scruff, whereupon he turned round and mauled me, having mauled poor Percy. Well, obviously he couldn't stay, and Battersea said they'd take him back, but I couldn't have him go back to a cage after he's been here. And so, as luck would have it, a couple were very keen to take Dick.
In the past, both royals and their pets have enjoyed a privileged existence, accompanying each other at work, rest and play. In an era of unprecedented change for the monarchy and increasing public scrutiny of their affairs, many of the traditional royal pursuits are now under threat. But it seems the future for royal pets in the court of the next King William remains assured.
William loves shooting. It's actually his favourite sport, and he likes nothing better than wandering over the hills at Balmoral with a gun in his hand and his dog at his side.